Hello and welcome along to part 2 of our latest FM22 hidden attribute experiment with me, Daniel. Last week we started on important matches. We picked 3 teams, we set every player to be able to deal with important matches perfectly, and we saw how it had an effect in the big games. If you missed that one, it is up in the eye above just now. But this week, we of course come back to do the opposite. In contrast, every player from those 3 teams have been set to important matches 1 out of 20 for the attribute. We are going to see just how much of an impact it has if your players and your team can't perform on the big stage. So if you're looking forward to finding out how it goes, then please do chuck a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe down below for daily FM22 content. There's a new top 3 coming later today. And in the meantime, you can find all the key links in the eye above or description down below. A massive thank you for your support as always, as we talk about big game players. Can they make a difference in FM? We know they can in real life, but we want to know how important some attributes are. So just like last week, we have been in the editor and we have gone to Arsenal, to West Ham and to Blackburn Rovers. We have set every player with no other attribute changes, but their important matches attribute to 1 out of 20. This means they shouldn't perform in the big matches. But what does FM perceive to be a big match? Will it have more of an impact on the teams that had a higher average attribute in that area anyway? There are so many questions left unanswered. We were a little bit surprised by what happened last week because neither of the Premier League teams had an absolutely massive turnaround. They maybe slightly underperformed, but probably not really. Whereas in the Championship, we have Blackburn Rovers, whose average is very low for important matches, and they stepped up big time to finish second. So doing the opposite this week, you'd imagine it should have less of an impact on Blackburn. Maybe they'll finish nearer to their true position, where the other 2 may suffer more, because of course, they were fairly good in the important matches overall in terms of attributes. So are we going to see Arsenal and West Ham struggle? There's only one way to find out, isn't there? Let's head over to FM22. We're a year into the future, we've simulated again. Let's see how our 3 teams have performed. Right then, 1st of June 2022. One season has been played and we are going straight to look at Arsenal, West Ham and Blackburn to see if we can get any closer to working out which hidden attribute is most influential in Football Manager. Let's start as always with Arsenal. Are they going to have underperformed? If this goes to form, as we saw last week, Blackburn overachieved there from the big step up. I'm expecting them to be a lot closer to where they were expected to be this time around, because of course they didn't have as much of a loss. Their important matches attribute across the board wasn't that great for most players. Whereas Arsenal and West Ham's, we're talking averages between 12 and 15 generally. So this is probably going to have a profound impact. Or it should. Let's go to Arsenal and see if it does. I think we might have found one of the most important attributes here on the face of it, because Antonio Conte is now in charge. Bit of a weird one that. And Arsenal are 9th in the Premier League. So firstly, Conte has gone straight from Spurs to Arsenal. That is astounding. But still, 9th place is below target. They were expected to be in the top 7, somewhere in those Europa places, according to the pre-season predictions. We've not seen them finish lower than 5th in any of our experiments so far. This is a big drop, so how many points it will be by will be interesting. And what games have they struggled in? Is it all the big games they've not been able to get themselves up for? Let's have a look at the players first. We'll get rid of the ones who are out on loan, because they're not going to be too important to us at the minute. So let's get rid of the ones not at the club and let's get them in selection info. So average rating, again, it seems like if you take one mental attribute away from them, the average rating individually is the biggest thing that suffers. You can actually see one of their few performers above a 7 is Martin Brathwaite, who they've bought in obviously in the winter window, and he's done all right for them. And they've bought in Omar Rekik as well. But generally speaking, they've performed really poorly. There's not as many goals about, no one with more than 14. They've also seemingly struggled a bit more defensively with a lot of people with lower ratings. So that is something that we're starting to see emerging as a pattern. What I'm intrigued by is what's happened in what games here, because they've clearly done worse, but what's FM deeming a big game? Because for that drop-off, you would expect they're considering quite a lot that way. Are they looking at the 5 or 6 London derbies? Are they looking at the top 6 or 7 sides? Because if it's both of those, you've probably got half the league they're losing to. So let's see what this means and how have they done in the cups. So first things first, I guess it does add up, doesn't it? They've lost against United. They've lost against Liverpool. When have they played the big boys? Drawn with Spurs, drawn with Chelsea, beat City in the League Cup. That's an anomaly slightly. Crystal Palace, London derby, lost. Away at Newcastle, don't know if that would be deemed a big game. City, what I'm looking for in the league is one of the big 6 or 7 where they've actually won. And Tottenham away on New Year's Day is the first one we've seen. They've been battered by Chelsea in the semi-final of the Carabao Cup and then in the league as well. Lost to Liverpool, United, City. So they've lost a few games you wouldn't expect. But what's happened is every time they've played a big match, and most of the times when they've played away in London derbies, they've just not been able to step up. It really is quite startling actually, isn't it? Lost away at West Ham towards the end as well. So have we found the magic FM formula? Is it derbies and the big teams? That's what I think we're going for here. Struggled in the cups, again lost away at London rivals Fulham, top championship rivals in the FA Cup. So I'm starting to see a pattern emerge there. It is interesting that when they've played at home against the sort of bottom half sides, when you see home to Southampton, home to Newcastle, home to Brighton, home to Palace, I know that one's a derby, home to Leeds, home to Wolves, home to Brentford. So at home against the bottom half teams, Burnley again, they've been very consistent. But when they've played some of the big boys, although they did lose 3-1 at home to Norwich, there are a couple of anomalies, but I think we've got a pattern. The only way we're going to know if that's right is probably by having a look at West Ham. But first, I just want to see when Conte took over. So he joined on the 18th of December, but Arteta left on the 20th of November. When was that? So that was after the Norwich and Leicester defeats, which probably were the 2 biggest anomalies of the season. If you go over the rest of it, other than maybe Watford at home, and perhaps the scale of the defeat away at Everton, I don't really think there's any shocks second half of the year, based on the formula we think we've found. So that's a pretty intriguing start, isn't it? Let's move on to West Ham. Are we on to something? I think we might be. West Ham, 14th in the Premier League. Again, by far the lowest we've seen them in any of these experiments so far. And what's interesting, again, a lot of London rivals, a lot of bigger sides in the Premier League. Is it because of the league reputation as well? Maybe more of the games are being considered big. But that is a pretty startling result for both sides. It's had the impact we thought, the opposite of what happened to Blackburn last time. So if Blackburn's effect is minimal, I think we consider this a success. Let's start by having a look at the players here. They've got the Club Bruges manager after David Moyes was sacked. Average ratings are awful. One regular player, Declan Rice, just above a 7. Jarrod Bowen struggling. For the first time, we've not really got any goals, any quality, and any level of success. It's the worst the likes of Souček, Zuma and Bowen have done. There is a real suggestion of struggle in the big games, and what I want to know, as they even resorted to getting in the likes of Barkley and Bergwijn on loan, is how they've done in the big competitions. Have they been able to go on a cup run or a European run? Or have they folded as soon as there's a big match? This is so interesting. So a pretty shocking start to the season. Lost to Chelsea and Arsenal, which you'd probably expect. Watford away, that's an interesting one. You wouldn't expect them to lose there. Lost away at Wolves, but again, we look at the results. It's generally the London sides and the big sides, albeit Burnley away, Watford away, slight exceptions. At home, they've not really lost against the bottom half teams. As we move further down, they drew with Liverpool and beat Spurs there, and drew with City. They're all big games. When did the manager come in? Because a new manager bounce could play a part here. Moyes wasn't sacked till February, so that month, very odd. Losing to Rangers and then doing well against the 3 big boys. That doesn't stack up. Whereas December does. Held by Palace in a London derby, lost at Leicester, who I'm guessing had a very good year, but then beat Norwich, Villa, Everton, Southampton, exactly as we'd expect. Had a horrible January, lost in the FA Cup to a Premier League team. Let's look at Europe. Lost in the quarterfinals to Sevilla, so as soon as they played a bigger reputation side. And then later in the season, I know they beat Arsenal, but then they lost the London derby at Brentford, they lost at Liverpool, they lost to Spurs and were held by City. Lost at Chelsea just before that run as well. So again, generally, maybe they've had a slightly more difficult season. They've got into poor runs. And I guess if you're playing and losing 3 or 4 in a row with West Ham, perhaps then you do lose a bit of that momentum. But then is that another part of this as well? If you're 5 without a win and the pressure's on, is it then a big game no matter who you play? I don't know how that factors into FM, but what we're starting to see is that definitely, in whatever way it happens, having a poor important attribute rating and having people who dread the big matches across the whole team definitely has an effect. So as long as you've got some in there that can handle it, you're all right. But this, you do not want a team of players that dread the game. But let's move on to Blackburn, shall we? Because they got a massive boost from having all of their important matches attributes up to 20 last week. They should really be roughly where they're expected to be as a result of going down to 1. Or has it had more of an impact than that? Let's move on and see. Well, Blackburn have finished basically exactly where they're expected to be. They're in that little bunch just below the playoffs. It's the first time they haven't made the top 6 in any of these experiments. But I think it probably proves our point. When you take an awful lot away from the important matches ability of your team, they struggle in the big games and they struggle to perform. And ironically, it's had more of an impact on consistency than the consistency attribute experiment did. So I'm really interested by this. It seems to be that going upwards, it doesn't have a huge effect. But if everyone dreads it, you are in big, big trouble. Whereas Blackburn, where a lot of the players didn't really deal with it well already, it doesn't seem to have had as much of an effect. What I want to know, though, is whether we get the Blackburn pattern. Because bar last time, where we set them to deal with the big matches well, they have always started the season pretty strongly and then been awful in the last 3 months. Is that going to happen again? Let's start with the average ratings. Again, whenever we've set one of these attributes to 1, the average ratings have been massively impacted. I'm not sure what causes that behind the scenes, and I'm not sure why Blackburn keep signing Ramirez in every single save. But here we are, and at the end of the season, it looks like they've just missed out on the playoffs with a pretty good side. How have they performed over the year, though? Did they have the classic tail off? No. So the last 2 or 3 months of the season, they actually didn't lose a game from March onwards. Lots of draws, I appreciate that, lots of drop points. But they finished the season as strongly as we've seen in any of these experiments. They did go out in the FA Cup in a big game to Aston Villa, but you'd probably expect that anyway. In the League Cup, they went out at home to Salford, which doesn't really go with the trend. It seems like they've just drawn all season. They drew every single game in December. They drew loads of them back in August where they started pretty poorly. Didn't win a game, in fact, until Hull in the middle of September. It's a really strange one, this. I wonder if it's because in the Championship most sides are pretty evenly matched in terms of star reputation, budgets in the top half, etc. It does seem that they're very tightly bunched, and to be fair, Blackburn have had neither a good nor bad season. It's just been average across the board. And considering their important matches attribute was probably around 10 on average across the team, it hasn't had as much of an effect. Certainly not as much as West Ham and Arsenal, which is exactly what we expected after what we saw last week. So I'm actually not that surprised, but I do think we're onto something here. It does seem that big game players can make you the difference. If you've got a whole team of them, you can maybe slightly overperform. But I think the biggest news to come out of this is if you've got a team that are consistent, that normally perform in the big games, say you sign 10 new players over the summer and most of them dread them, maybe we're finding why we're bringing in better players but not having a better level of success or even reaching the same heights as before. Is important matches the most important attribute out there? It might be crucial based on the evidence we've seen here. But the experiments don't stop there. We will try and find our way to the bottom of this. There's got to be one that just goes absolutely mad and has a massive, massive impact. There's too many patterns in FM we've seen over the years to suggest that one of those hidden attributes doesn't do something profound. Maybe this is the one, maybe it's a combination of two, but we are going to try our best to find out what it is. However, we will be having a 1-week break from this experiment series because next week, F1 Manager 2022 is out and I am looking forward to sharing some of that with you. Hopefully it's a good game. Please do come and check it out if you're interested. In the meantime, there will still be daily FM22 content, a new top 3 later today, and there will still be one next Sunday as well. All of the links up in the eye above. If you did enjoy this experiment, please do put a thumbs up on it. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of the findings there, because I think they're probably the most telling yet. If you want to stay up to date, subscribe and turn that notification bell on. Check out all my links down in the description below. And I'll see you again here later today for a brand new episode of Top 3.